And so here comes the fun part. We're going to talk about all the stuff that you don't like to think about or talk about or dwell on at all. So we're going to dwell on it for a half hour. The first question that I have to ask you is, how do you think you want to die? The first question is, how many of you, by a show of hands, would like to die in their sleep at home at
But not tonight.
Not until you get your documents in place.
How many of you would like to die in a hospital or a nursing facility? Oh, hands. How many of you would like to be taken out in a sudden accident?
Would the accident hurt?
I don't know. See, that's the, yeah, who knows? And how many of you would like to be victims of violence? These are the majority of the ways that people die in this world. I'm going to get to one figure in a moment, but the reality is that none of us get out of here alive. Every single one of us knows where we're going. We may not know what happens after death. We as Christians have a trust and a confidence in what happens, but even then, Christians of the CRC tradition versus Seventh-day Adventists have different ideas of what happens after we die. But you, the person next to you, your parents, your children, even me, we're all going to die. Then I know that most of you chose as the first option that you would like to die at home in your sleep. But I'm going to give you just a little reality check. 70% of people die in hospitals or nursing homes. So, while it's comforting to think that you might be able to have that moment of just passing away at night and not knowing what's happening, chances are that is not going to be the reality for you. In some ways, you would be lucky if it was just a short hospital stay, you got ill, very quick illness, and that might be the end, provided that you've done all the pre-planning that we just talked about. But for many people in this country, what we experience is the slow progression of illness. It doesn't come on right at one time, rather it builds up, and it takes its toll on our lives and our relationships. So it's terrifying, this thought of death, and it should be, us all walking into the unknown. For thousands of years, people have tried to understand life and death. We try to make meaning out of it any way we can. And faith is probably the best way to make meaning out of it. But there's other ways to make meaning, too, out of this balance that we have between life and death. It can be about creating bonds of friendship and family, or seeking to do justice in this life for our fellow human being. Through relationships, love, and faith, we can mitigate some of this fear of death that we all have inside of us. So, as you're in this room, it's okay to fear death. I want you to know that, because pretty much every person does. How much we fear depends on who we are as people, depends on our lives and our history. But it's just part of who we are. Christianity is great, I think. Part of that is because it's a religion of life and not death. If you think about the Christian story, our story does not end with the death of Jesus. It is only a stepping point to the resurrection. We are Christians because of the resurrection, not simply because of the death. So, if as a reflection of Christ we are to be light in this world, we need to find ways to live life. The simple truth is that dying is in fact easy. It's remarkably simple. One moment you are here, and the next you are not. Life, though, is different. Life is a little hard at times. None of us understand this death, but God gave us life so that we may live and that others may live too. And Scripture tells us over and over and over again, do not fear. There's the great passage from Luke, consider the lilies. And then again in Isaiah, God says, so do not fear, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous hand. And then my favorite line of Scripture in Luke 12:32, Jesus says, fear not, little flock, for it is the Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. It's all about life. Life over fear. And we can obsess about death, but we need not to, because Jesus says that this is not the end of the story. So when we talk about fear, when we talk about death, there's probably this thought on your head of, when I grow old, will I live or will I just survive? When does old age start? Many of you in this room are thinking, I'm not old. And that's fine. It's good to live with that mentality. I had a 26-year-old detox patient, no, she was 28, asked me if she was old. And I was like, I'm 34, so no, you're not old. But people are always wondering, how old am I really? You can be active until you're dead. Life is indivisible. And the indivisibility of life is at the center of human existence. Night flows into day, time is fluid. It's not just bam, bam, bam. The Brazilian poet and theologian Rubem Alves writes, I want to have a long life, but not at any price. I want to live as long as I have the ability to be moved by beauty, and the name for that emotion before beauty is joy. That means living a full life is not a biological issue, a heartbeat or a brain wave. When joy ceases, the body becomes a coffin, no matter the age of that body. Thus, human life is not only a product of nature, it also exists as we have the ability to experience beauty and happiness. So, as we talk about pre-planning, if 70% of us will die in a hospital or in a nursing home, how does that change our understanding of life and death? First, it takes us out of ourselves. No longer do we have the ultimate say over our life and death. We may not necessarily get to be surrounded by loved ones like a peaceful kingdom that we all imagine. In our day and age, families are spread out. They live far away. So it's sometimes hard to get families to the hospital to be with the person that they love at the moment of death. Also in the hospital, we risk medical interventions. We risk strangers looking after us. We risk procedures and policies applying to us and governing over us. It's rather disconcerting if we held the notion that we will die at home. Someone else will be there. Someone you don't know, someone who doesn't know you necessarily. But it's not that. Some people have a very big fear of the hospital. And as someone who works in there all the time, I can understand the fear of the hospital. But actually there are a lot of good, wonderful, kind people there who are willing to be with you and to support you in these moments and making decisions for your family members or just being present at the moment of death. Family is always welcome, and these caring people always seek to do your best interest and the best interest of the person who is in the patient bed. Actually, before our modern hospital systems, the reality of dying at home was not even this idea of you would just go to sleep one night and not wake up the next day. In fact, home deaths were quite agonizing. People would linger for long periods of time and go through, they would have to be cared for by their family members, and if their family members had to work during the day, sometimes people were left at home for long hours. And which would be better, to be left alone for long hours in a diaper at home, or to be in a hospital and have someone looking after you, turning you, keeping the bed sores away, taking care of you? It may not be as bad as you might think. So in your pre-planning, as we talk about advanced directives, one of my jobs as a chaplain is to talk to families about advanced directives in the hospital. An advanced directive is the medical power of attorney, the living will, and any sort of healthcare directive like a do not resuscitate order. So it is important when you come into the hospital to know who it is that would speak for you if you are unable to speak for yourself. And as we said, most likely it's going to be your spouse or the closest direct relationship to you. But the other day, I had a woman who was very self-aware and knew that her husband would not be able to carry out her wishes. She did not want medical interventions. She did not want any of that stuff, but she knew her husband would not be able to let her go, which is fine. So she chose her sister. And we had to make it very clear to medical staff that the sister would be the one to answer the questions and take care of her. Whoever you give your power of attorney to for healthcare has the same rights as you as a person walking around today. So they can look at your medical record. So you must make sure that you trust the person who is going to speak for you. Because if they are not so trustworthy, they could go in and dig through all of your medical history, and that's not so fun. But some words that you're going to hear about in the hospital are ventilation, whether you would like mechanical sustaining of life. There'll be things like chest compressions, choices about IV fluids, whether you would like to receive that, blood products. Many of our Jehovah's Witnesses do not accept blood products. So it's important for Jehovah's Witnesses especially to have a document that says what they would like. Artificial nutrition, we've already mentioned the Terry Schiavo case. And then dialysis. Dialysis is another big question of whether or not that is something that you or your loved one wants to go through in this life, because it is very hard. In my work as a chaplain, one of the things that I try to do is to bring dignity to family members and to patients. So on your handout, I have a couple questions from this system of therapy called dignity therapy. Dignity therapy is about producing a document that reflects who someone is in their life. This is not for someone who is dying in this moment, but it is for someone who perhaps has a chronic illness or who may be terminal in some way, but is still able to speak for themselves. And it has asked questions about the person to help to get to know them better, to bring out their personal stories. I included this in here because this is a way of talking to your loved ones about their desires at the end of their lives. So if you sit down with someone that you care about and ask them, tell me a little bit about your life history, particularly the parts that you either remember most or think are most important. When did you feel most alive? These questions get down to the heart of who we are as people, and they encourage us to think about what it is we truly desire for ourselves in our lives. So do we desire life at any cost? Do we want to perhaps do some things to sustain our life? Are we thinking about the quality of life that we have in this moment? Or do we need to say, I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to let myself go. I'm going to go into the light, as the phrase goes, or allow natural death. These choices are individual, but they're things that if we think about them in this life, we get some clarity for ourselves and for our loved ones. And it kind of takes away the mystery of death. Nothing takes it away fully, but it makes us think, maybe it's not about death, but it's about life. It's about the life I live now, and how this life can transcend death. So we produce a generative document, a document that goes forward, that goes to your loved ones, and that they can take with them to know that this is the person that I care about. They're still here with me in spirit, even though their body has passed. So I'm going to talk a little bit about witnessing death. As someone who has witnessed death many, many times in the hospital and of my loved ones, I can tell you that death is not normally scary for the person who's dying. They normally don't have any reactions or display any sort of emotion or anything that would make you think. It's usually pretty peaceful. It's usually pretty calm. In the Judaic tradition, the belief is that the soul lies in the stomach of the person. So I've always been keen to watch the stomach of the person who's dying to see if I can catch the soul escaping. But that might be a little metaphysical for you. But if you actually watch the stomach of a person, you can tell when the breath is slowing down, when things are shutting down and stuff. So that's just one of our little chaplain things to do. One of my biggest complaints about television is that oftentimes when a person dies on TV, the first thing the family wants to do is close the person's eyes. I can tell you it doesn't work. So I have sat and watched families desperately try to close their loved one's eyes. It doesn't work, so you don't need to do that. I'm sure that there's a certain point of rigor mortis that it does work, but not right away. So it can be quite disconcerting when a loved one dies with their eyes open. But this is a reality, it's something that happens. choosing life is not always easy at the end. There are many situations that I personally do not know what I would do in that moment. I don't know what I would do with a certain diagnosis or if I was given a certain option. For instance, a month ago, we had a 72-year-old gentleman who was diagnosed with an abdominal aortic aneurysm. An abdominal aortic aneurysm is a fatal condition. He was presented with the option of having surgery, but he risked the possibility of dying on the table during the surgery, or he could live with the ticking time bomb inside him. What did he do? He chose to live. He lived for 4 weeks at home until he came to our hospital as the aneurysm had ruptured. It took 24 hours for death to occur, but his family was by his side, and he knew what was coming. I think that's probably one of the scariest things for me, is to think that you know death is coming. But he was peaceful. There were times of prayer. His family made him comfortable. The nursing staff made him comfortable. And so we can't necessarily know how to make a decision for someone else, but hearing stories about how other people have handled it can at times give us hope for how we can respond to death, or how we can think about what's going to happen. Some people actually choose to die in the hospital. We had a cancer patient recently who was about my age. She had a son slightly younger than me, and she did not want to die at home. She wanted to die in the hospital, surrounded by the people who cared about her. She felt the most. The people who have taken care of her for over a year and everything. And it was really quite beautiful to see how much staff gathered around her and her family and her young son, and to take care of her. So choosing or allowing yourself to die in the hospital may not be a bad option at all. So what are your responsibilities as family members in the moment when you're with your loved one who's possibly in the final stages of life? Grief is always acceptable. Some people have this idea that you cannot cry in front of your loved one. In actuality, if you do not cry in front of your loved one, you're kind of lying to them, and they can sense it. Some people actually want to see emotion coming off their loved ones to know that this means something to them. And you can't pretend that it's all going to be okay either. It's painful to lose someone that you love. They're part of who you are. It's losing part of yourself. It's okay to cry. And as a loved one who, say, you watch your loved one pass in front of you, you have to drink lots of water because you're going to be crying and crying, and tears need water in order to sustain themselves. You should be open to emotional expression. It's okay to let all of that out. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to be stoic, even, if you have to. Not coming from the Dutch community myself, but some of my husband's family has very deep Dutch roots, and a lot of their family is very stoic about everything. And that's okay, but it's okay to also let it out. It's okay to even do something that goes against who you are as a person or your family history. If you are passing in a hospital, or if your loved one is in a hospital or nursing home, you can have your pastor come in. You personally can call your pastor and have them come in, or you can have a nurse that you can tell the staff that this is what you'd like, and they'd be happy to call for you, or you can have a chaplain come in. I found actually that many families are very welcoming of the chaplain in these final moments, because I hold you where you are in that moment, and I don't journey with you beyond that. So you can be true and honest about how you feel. You can express any sorts of doubts or concerns about what life means in that moment. And I don't go back to your home church and tell anybody. You don't have to see me. You can put it out there and have it just be without having to look at it or to shape it in any way around social situations or anything like that. Try not to take photos. I'm pretty sure nobody here would do this, but I've seen it a lot recently. People like to take photos in the hospital when their loved one passed, and it's just not really appropriate. So you want to remember a person for who they are in their life, not for in that moment in the hospital bed. Most hospitals and nursing facilities do in fact have chaplains, so just ask the nurse and they can call for you, and one usually shows up within 30 minutes. So another responsibility, this is the big one that hospitals ask, is that you choose a nursing home. A funeral home. At our hospital, at many of the areas, you have 24 hours to decide. So you don't have to have one in that moment. The chaplain can assist you in finding one if you're unfamiliar, or the chaplain can call one for you if you've chosen one. We kind of take the burden off of you to make that initial phone call, and so we just make the funeral home aware that your loved one has passed and that it's okay to come and get them. So that's the one thing that most hospitals ask. Some hospitals have you sign a piece of paper that allows your loved one to be taken to the funeral home, just a release of their body. Some hospitals don't have that, but all of the Adventist Health System hospitals have this protocol. So this is a little bit about death, but life carries on. I think about Psalm 137, where David said, "By the rivers of Babylon we sat down and wept when we remembered Zion." Zion is more than just the place of the holy in the minds of Israel. It is the place where God is. It is the place where love is. So if we take this line of scripture and make it into a metaphor for ourselves, our loved ones are Zion. Our loved ones are people that we care about. They're where our faith, our hope, and our love is. And so it's okay to grieve them. It's okay to pre-grieve if they are very intensely ill and dying, but nothing takes away from that initial time when your loved one has passed and you're left behind. So it's natural to weep, but it's good to share this grief with others. A shared grief is a healed grief. It's one where the burden is lifted off of you, because in grief our minds get all muddled up. They get overcome with all sorts of different thoughts and everything. So by sharing parts of how we feel, we kind of take some of that out and put it out there to be looked at and processed. The greatest quote that was ever given to me about grieving is this: "Pain never goes away, it only changes with time." Nothing takes away the pain of losing someone that you love. But time does heal all wounds. It sounds so cliche, and it sounds like something that you want to say, well, that's not true. But unfortunately, it actually is true. Time takes away some of the initial burden of loss, and it changes it. It gives you perspective on what you went through and how you feel now. And sometimes we're not actually after healing when our loved one dies. It's not about healing wounds, but being at peace with them, to not feel the salt in them so much, and to not feel the overwhelming hardship that they are. Each day may get a little better with time. Now, I'm sure most of you have heard of Kubler-Ross and her stages of grief and dying. The actuality is that that book was written for people who were dying, not for family members left behind. So when we apply her principles to those who are left behind for grieving loved ones, they may not work exactly the same. But they're good principles to follow behind, in that you're going to experience anger, sadness, bargaining, all sorts of different emotions. And it's okay to go through those. But the things that you can do to help people that you love who have experienced loss, who've lost, say, a mother or a son or a spouse, is to remember anniversaries for them. People love to be remembered. It means that their life meant something. So call your mother. When you're thinking about her, when you're thinking about someone who's lost someone, to call them, to just show that extra respect and that extra care, that, just say, hey, I was thinking about you and how you're doing. Because grief is the thing that we all carry around, but nobody wants to talk about it. And we also worry that we're going to be a burden for someone else. I would also tell you that the line, "I'm afraid I'm going to be a burden," is not something that you should carry with you, because being a burden is not a judgment on yourself, it's a judgment on the other person. You can't know if you're a burden unless you check it out with someone else. You are not them, so you don't know how they're responding to you. So never assume that you are a burden on someone else. And the reality is that we all make mistakes at the time of loss, beforehand, and afterwards when we're grieving. Grief is something that overwhelms us, and it takes away our reasoning capacity. So you will make mistakes. You will forget to do something, or you will forget to say something, or you will react badly to something that someone says to you. But it's important to be gracious to yourself and not delude yourself by second guessing. You can't take it back. So all you can do from that point on is to live and to honor life in what you do. I included on your handout a couple of readings. The first one is How We Die by Sherman B. Newland. He is a doctor, and his whole book is about the medical processes of how we die. And for me, it was very illuminating and kind of took away this mystique of it being something otherworldly, death. It was rather, yeah, Jan has my copy there. It was much more about the practicality and the reality that we will all die and what that might look like and how it might feel. And so I highly recommend that book. Another book that I read is The Denial of Death by Ernest Becker. This is a very psychologically heavy book. It goes into a lot of Freud. So if you want to read about Freud, go ahead. But it kind of makes you feel like, okay, well, everybody else wrestles with this too. So it's a very good book to hold on to. And then The Year of Magical Thinking by Joan Didion. This is a nonfiction memoir of her experience of losing her husband and her grief afterwards. So The Year of Magical Thinking is about all the thoughts that went through her head the year after her loved one died. And as someone who's lost people close to me, I really felt her pain, and I really felt like that was truth, that she really spoke all the things that you might experience when you lose someone. So I hope that this helped you to think a little bit more about your own death and what death looks like. And I'm here